Welcome to the Retirement Planning Podcast with certified financial planners Richard W. Paul and Stephen Paul. Listen to a highlight from our recent radio show as we discuss the worlds of finance and retirement. I tell you what, we did a show, a couple weeks ago was Mother's Day, and I guess this is a little premature because we're not at Father's Day yet, but I thought we could have a little fun with a segment that I kind of titled Not Your Father's Retirement. And when I put that down, I started thinking about those old Oldsmobile commercials that they used to have where it said, Not Your Father's Oldsmobile.
Now I had an old Oldsmobile, Regency 98. Very nice car. Very nice car.
Oh, no, they were great, but it kind of reminded me of those commercials where they were trying to change the imaging a little bit. I got to thinking about it, and I thought, a lot of our audience, a lot of our listening audience are retirees, pre-retirees, and their parents, obviously retired, the prior generation. It's just not the same now. The world has changed so much, as you guys can attest. So let's talk about a couple of bullet points here about how it's just not the same for people retiring today as it was 30 years ago. One of the first kind of key points is being in the age 65 used to be obviously the deadline. People had their pensions, they get to 65, they're ready to retire. But it's okay to work past 65 now, whether you want to, need to, whatever the reasons are. There's not a stigma attached to it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And as you said, the previous generations did have their pensions. They had a pretty standard deal. There's nothing standard today at all. And I think the reason for that is, Social Security came along in 1935. And at the time, 65, it's the number the bureaucrats just kind of picked out of the air because, we didn't live past 65 for the most part. So
yeah, wasn't it 63 was the average lifespan or something?
Yeah. And if you're lucky at a 2 or 3 year golden retirement year, and that was it, if you didn't die shortly after retiring. But that's a different deal today,
right.
And that was reasonable because, 65, you had Medicare, but that's just a made-up number anymore. It certainly isn't a directive, and that's kind of the message we have to the folks out there is it's okay to work beyond that age. And
a lot of people want to nowadays. They feel good.
Yeah, they feel good. And they, some think that, there's a stigma to working longer than that. And we've got folks that like what they do. And, not everybody wants to spend their whole retirement hunting or fishing or playing golf. Not every day, all day.
Wow, Steve, can you believe he said that? Mr. Golf?
Well, we have clients that still really love what they do, but then we also have clients that don't really like what they do so much, but they've never made more money, and it's really difficult to give up maybe a couple $100,000 a year.
Yeah, well, it is. And so whatever you like to do with your time off, it may not be something you want to do, like I say, every day, all day. And some people really like their work. They love their work, and they want to continue with it. And we have people, hey, look at the politicians. They never retire. Although, that gets me, I'm going to segue here. Maybe they should retire. but
that's another show.
Yeah, that's another show. But yeah.
I would say 70% of our clients are still working beyond 65.
Really?
But that doesn't necessarily mean they're grinding away doing what they did their entire lives.
Right. They're not putting in the 50-hour weeks, but maybe still working. Yeah.
They're working as a starter on a golf course and playing free golf, or working a seasonal job at Lowe's and getting a discount on their yard supplies.
True.
It's just something that you truly enjoy now at this point, something to get you out of the house.
And I imagine there's some considerations in there for you guys when doing your retirement plans, because if they're still making money, there's some adjustments, I guess, that would go into the overall strategy, right?
Yeah, you have to take everything into consideration. We just did some planning for somebody, and the difference between them retiring today versus 3.5 years from now is such a significant number, because you're not drawing on your accounts, you're growing your compounding. Your Social Security is growing compounding by 8% during that time period, and so it's just a nice bump up. So there's no question. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. So we'll talk more about that as we go through the segment, I'm sure.
Yeah, and you talk about compounding periods too. So if you have that bigger salary coming in, and wealth transfer is a big goal for you, you want to leave your kids in a better position. If you're making $100,000 to $150,000 and you're not spending it, you're continuing to contribute to your 401k or IRA, and that's growing for another couple of years. That can lead to a lot more on the back end of retirement, going to your family, leaving them in a better position.
Yep, no question.
No, that makes a lot of sense, obviously. And, another, I guess, kind of difference in today's age is that I think a lot of us used to assume that when we got to retirement, the cost of retirement would be cheaper, right? Probably, I think the average was 20% or something. But being retired today, in a lot of cases, actually, can be more expensive than working.
Totally agree. You talk about the 80% rule. You're going to spend about 80% of what you were spending when you were working. I think that's off.
Yeah,
I have clients that spend 50% of what they were spending when they were working. I have clients that spend 150% of what they were spending when they were working. It all depends on what you're going to do once you retire. If you're going on a couple really nice vacations a year, I mean, your expenses can really kick up quite a bit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We've seen it with clients, especially the wife who has kind of been held at bay on her travel schedule because of the work schedule for one or both of them. And all of a sudden now every day is a Saturday, and we got people traveling as much as quarterly. And that kind of slows down. But sometimes they'll run 2 or 3 years at that rate before they finally get tired of all the security checks and,
the go-go years, right? Especially when you first hit retirement, you're ready to go. So
yeah, you're ready to go. And we've watched their expenses kind of skyrocket. So they literally could double their expenses during that time period. As long as you have the extra cash on hand to be able to do that and not have it impact your retirement, it's okay. But you do have to budget for it.
Well, then you talk about healthcare costs too. From 60 to 65, you retire in that window. I mean, you're going to have a lot more expenses there. It's probably going to be your biggest expense, to be honest.
Well, close to it. It's going to be second or third on the line item on your expenses. You need to price that out. We've said that before on the show, is know what those costs are, because you're not eligible for Medicare yet. And so if you pull the trigger at that point, you make sure you have that budgeted in, because you might be shocked at what those costs are.
So important to have that budget. Start planning a couple years out. Really start budgeting, tracking your essential expenses. Because once you get into retirement, you'll have a good idea of what you want to do when it comes to your variable expenses, your traveling, maybe spoiling the grandkids, that kind of stuff.
Yep, absolutely, no question.
Well, this has been the Retirement Planning Podcast with certified financial planners Richard W. Paul and Steve Paul of R.W. Paul and Associates. Make sure that you reach out to them at 248-305-9911. That's 248-305-9911. This has been the Retirement Planning Podcast.
All matters discussed during the show are for informational purposes only and shall in no way be construed as a solicitation to sell securities or investment advisory services to residents of any state other than Michigan. Topics should be discussed with your individual advisor prior to implementation. Investment advisory services offered through Richard W. Paul and Associates, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Insurance services offered through Midwest Financial Consultants, Inc.